Hey. Hey, testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Uh, Today, this topic is a little bit personal for me, so I hope I can deliver something through my own experience. So, if you are in the VI admin space and you're wondering, how do I get to that next platform engineering or an SRE type of thing, I'm just going to here share what I went through, and maybe that might help somebody, right? So this is just me sharing in an afternoon at VM Explore. So I've been at VMware for the past 13 years now. I started off as a Linux system admin, and then moved to virtualization, and then moved to Kubernetes. So that is why I'm here talking. I think I've been in the industry for more than 22 years now. I was a Linux admin. I then worked into very specific area of administration, which was setting up firewalls, VPNs, and stuff like that. Then I was hired by EMC to kind of test their Clarion storage array systems. So I babbled in storage a little bit. And then I was hired by VMware around 13 years ago. So, and this is where I felt like I didn't even knew what VMware was back then. I was just simply being a good Linux admin. I didn't know what VMware was. Somehow I got an opportunity, but they said you have to be a VCP certified professional. And so I learned VCP. I gave the certification, figured out what VMware is, and then became a VI admin. And within VMware, I think I've dabbled into multiple different careers. I was a VI admin in the platform division. And then I got an opportunity to move up the stack, as they say, is to talk about vCloud Director. I don't know if anybody knows about that product, but that was a multi-tenancy product that was set up on vSphere. It's still being used by service providers a lot, but that's another product area that I worked on. And then around 2015 or 2016-ish, I started hearing the term Kubernetes, Kubernetes, Kubernetes. And I'm like, I was just wondering what the hell it is. And so I tried to figure it out. Luckily, at VMware, we were also at that same time trying to, get into this whole new wave of containerized software and workloads. And we created a new division. And I interviewed and I got through that. And so since the last 6 years, I've been within the division called Tanzu at VMware. And so this is what I'm trying to, go through as, the summarizing that whole journey and learnings from that whole journey. Now, what is a platform engineer? And before even we want to try to become one, I just want to clarify what that means. And everybody can have a different opinion here. I think platform engineering is one of those terms like DevOps. It means different to different people. But essentially, long before VMware or with VMware, we had this notion of, if you think about applications, they were bundled in the virtual machine, and then they were given to us, like the traditional VI admins, and like, go figure out, go deploy this. I don't know how, just deploy for me, right? So that is where we were. And that's essentially the domain that I stayed at a lot. Then the whole wave of Docker came in, and Docker created this whole container wave, and everybody went crazy about containerized workloads. But essentially, what that was instead of pushing things in a virtual machine, we were now, putting it in a container. It's a smaller size, and then running, along with the orchestrator like Kubernetes. And that, that process essentially made the application deployment a little bit more simpler. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say off the wall. Like, now I can actually tell to my VI admin or my infrastructure admin, here is how I want my app deployed in a more specified format, right? So that is what I think when you think about a platform engineer, it's that higher level abstractions over the infrastructure as a service capability, where either you're pushing applications through a containerized format and giving a specification, or you're just pushing code directly to a platform that understands everything and that will automatically build everything that is needed on top of an infrastructure to satisfy whatever the application requirements are, right? To configure it, to load balance it, to provide it with storage, to configure security, all of that, I think. And then there's a whole, because this is no longer a disjoint process where somebody's throwing a VM at you and you have to figure out how to deploy that, there is now a process involved called a deployment pipeline, or nowadays we call it CI/CD, but essentially it is a way to take that code or that container and push it to that platform, right? And platform engineering essentially is managing all that stack on the right-hand side, the integrated stack, plus the red line around the deployment pipeline, right? So that is what essentially, to me, platform engineering is. It is maintaining that stack such that it's all about application, and they can deploy, they can run however they want, right? So in quick 5 minutes, that's what platform engineering to me, or SRE to me, means, is maintaining that. Now, then we come to the idea of, okay, why a platform? I just want to take 2 minutes to get to this, right? Why platform engineering is becoming so prevalent? Why are we hearing about it so much, right? So if you think about how we were managing applications, again, there's a perspective shift where we were thinking only about infrastructure, and then we laid platform applications on top of that. Now we are thinking more application, and then how does my infrastructure work towards that, right? So there's a shift in perspective. So if you had your traditional vSphere environment, you had your hypervisor, your servers, your different networking gears, your security teams, your storage teams, and managing an application meant managing the vSphere environment, managing the storage, managing all of those components individually, right? And this is even with software-defined data center, or even with VMware Cloud Foundation today, you still have to go through the whole process of, saying, I need this application here. Here's my storage, here's my network, here's my IP address, here's how I want it load balanced, etc., right? And then we went into the world of cloud computing, where everything was still an API. But now, apart from talking about virtual machine images and storage and networking, we now have to talk about security, IAM policies, VPCs, and all of those things, right? Managing applications is still more complex, I feel like, even in the cloud world than it was in the vSphere world, because you're trading hardware management to a lot more complex elastic computing, but it's still more complex, right? Instead of that, how about we just have a single API, right? Like, let's say it's Kubernetes right now, and all we have to tell the API what we want, and the API does everything for us, instead of us talking to the 10 different APIs, right? So that's what, I feel like that's what a platform should do. It should talk to the app. It should communicate what an application requirements are, and automate everything in the infrastructure, build everything in the infrastructure needed for that application, right? So that's the perspective change that we need. Now, how do we get to it? How do we start learning about it? Let's get into that. So when again, like I said, I didn't understand VMware. I was a Linux sysadmin. To understand VMware, I kind of had to go through a perspective change on why that technology makes sense, and etc. So a couple of things to keep in. This is what at least I kept in mind where I was trying to understand a new technology. You can understand technology by watching YouTube videos, going through architecture diagrams, going through, learnings, etc., etc. But there has to be some perspective in place into why that is happening, right? So, for example, a couple of things that came to my mind as I was learning about Kubernetes and I was learning about VMware long ago was, how is my infrastructure being managed today? What are my application teams doing? How are apps being deployed, right? How long does it take for an application to get deployed? From a business perspective, what are my business goals? How is that being translated into, something like a developer coming in and saying, hey, I need this, or this is how the app works. How can we quickly implement that? What are our turnaround times, etc., right? So I think thinking in these terms will help if you're wanting to understand the technology a little bit more, right? So again, it all boils down to what the process is today, what are the inefficiencies in that process today, and then how can we go about changing those or making those better. If you have these perspectives in mind, and then you go ahead, learn about a technology, that might help a lot more, right? So just to keep things in mind. So, okay, finally, how do we go about learning? So, okay, you have your perspective in mind, you understand why a platform makes sense, you understand why you have to move towards that platform, etc. Now, how do I, this is something that I did. Again, this is very personal, so there might be more than one way of skinning the cat, but this is what I did, right? So you learn about the core technology abstractions and its architecture, right? So for example, when I wanted to understand VMware, vSphere, or Kubernetes, I figured out, okay, what that means. What does it do to the infrastructure stack? How do you go about it? How do you transform that into something like, you know, what's the process difference, right? So that is just something to keep in mind. Then understand the components of that architecture, right? Okay, vSphere has all these different pieces, parts. Similarly, Kubernetes has all these different pieces, parts. How do they function together? Then the third, and this is for me the most important thing to learn anything new, is have a sandbox environment, right? So if you have a sandbox Kubernetes cluster or a vSphere environment, that is how you start by learning. You can look at videos, you can look at, you know, all the API documentation all you want, or architectures, but unless you get your hands dirty by actually practicing something, you're not going to get it, right? So generic steps. Of course, then go ahead, familiarize yourself with the CLI, API, all of that. And then practice some pseudo use cases. This is how I learned, honestly. Like I would, when I was moving from VI admin to being a Kubernetes expert, I was like, okay, if this is a change in technology, what does that mean from a process perspective? Who is going to actually consume the API? What are they going to do with that? Let me try doing that and figure out how that works, right? So I would figure out use cases like, first of all, standing up that stack. Then I would be the developer. I would wear the developer hat. Of course, I wouldn't code, but I'll take any sample application, or even if you have something in your organization, you can try to do that and run the process of actually deploying that, right? So figure out what are those use cases based on your organizations and actually run it in your, you know, sandbox environment. The final step, that's how I got into VMware with VCP, was if it makes sense, take a certification, right? So for example, the CCAT certification for Kubernetes is very, very popular. So if you really, really feel like, I haven't taken it personally because, you know, I didn't need to, but I know sometimes it will be very impactful to have certifications, right? So do that. Now, how did I do this with Kubernetes? I'm just going to walk through, like, this is my Git repo. Can I project this over there? Let's do this. All right. So I'll just share the link for this afterwards as well. But what I've done here is, this is a GitHub repo. And all the resources that I have gone through, that I've learned, I've actually put them up in that repo where you can actually practice some sample use cases. You can even figure out how to go about it. There are some really good books over there, etc. So, for example, for understanding, you know, some of the core technologies, the Kubernetes website is great for understanding the architecture, kind of the, you know, some of the API calls, or some of the just the system architecture in general. If you want to just understand, the Kubernetes website is great. Then there's a very good video on YouTube called Why Kubernetes and vSphere, right? If you really, you know, and all of that is linked, so I'll share the link with the QR code later on. But if you really want to get a quick of why Kubernetes and vSphere and how to go about it, watch that video. That's really good. There is a good book called Kubernetes on vSphere for Dummies. It's a PDF copy. I've linked it over there. You can download that. Again, it is amazing book where you can, you know, run through like 50 pages and you'll understand what that means, how it extends Kubernetes, how your DRS cluster can now become a Kubernetes cluster, etc. Right? So some of the key concepts over there are amazing. So go through that book. Now, understanding the infrastructure, again, there are the Kubernetes website is amazing. If you are into books, Kubernetes Up and Running is an amazing book by O'Reilly. It is a little bit thorough, meaning it's a very thick book to go through. But if you're not into that, I have not read it till date, and I don't think anybody has to. If if you have a different style or format of learning, you don't have to go read books. But I've just linked that because I know it's a very popular content out there. Now, the third and the most critical thing, how do you deploy a sandbox environment? How many of you have vSphere right now on your labs? Yeah, So do you know you can just spin up a cluster, Kubernetes cluster over there in vSphere, right? So I would do that. Just spin up a Kubernetes cluster, figure out how that works. If you can't do that, go to Google Kubernetes engine. That's how I did it, because I mean, when I started learning about Kubernetes, it was long before vSphere with Kubernetes came along. So the only place I could learn more or play with Kubernetes was Google Kubernetes engine. And Google back then had a $300 credit. So if you just sign up for Google Cloud, and it will give you a $300 credit, you can run a Kubernetes cluster for at least a month or two, depending upon usage, right? So and Google Cloud has extensive documentation on samples, workflows, etc. So again, that is a great resource to go through. Fourth, get familiar with the Kubernetes CLI UI. The CLI reference like basic commands like how to deploy an app, scale an app, build a load balancing service, etc. You need to learn those CLI commands because it is very CLI centric. It unfortunately doesn't have like ClickOps kind of, how vSphere has you can just drop something and the UI will create that. Kubernetes doesn't have that, so the CLI is the only way to do that. And then you get a dashboarding tool. Two of my top favorite dashboarding tools are Lens. This is, again, I think by Red Hat. If you have a cluster and you want to visually see, because everything is through CLI, and if you really want to see what's going on, Lens is a great tool to do that. And there is a K9s tool, which is more like ESXi top or top command if you run on Linux, right? So K9s is very similar to that, and it's a very good tool. It shows you what's going on in your cluster. Now, practicing use cases, I've linked to some sample applications that you can start deploying. You can even create the pipeline that automates the deployment of these applications through Kubernetes. There are much more resources. If you just go to the examples that I've linked over here, you get a list of sample applications to run through, etc. So these are, I would say, kind of like some of the resources that I've collected, and I can link them here. Oh. Oh. Yeah, so if you just want to get a screenshot of that QR code, that it will take you to that Git repo over there. All right, and I think that's it. That's all I had to share. If you have any questions, I can take them for the next 2 to 3 minutes, or I'll be standing over here if you're shy. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.